in unhearing. And so I was like, well, Lord, if you want us to do this, they're going to have to be agreeable to it because I can't do it on my own. And man, they were so quick to affirm and say, yeah, that's a good direction for Hope for the Summer. So that's what we're doing, right? We're going to focus on marriage. And today, we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to look at love. And I want to preface this whole thing by saying 1 Corinthians 13 is not actually about marriage, right? This is about love within the body of Christ, as it relates specifically and as it's compared and contrasted specifically to spiritual gifts in the church and to how we relate to one another in the church. So let's start by acknowledging that, but then let's realize that as that relates to how we interact with one another, with other Christians, how much more should this relate to how we interact in our family, which is hopefully the Christians that we are closest with. Hopefully our families are following Jesus. Hopefully my spouse and I are following Jesus together. And so the things that we're going to see today in 1 Corinthians 13, while it's primarily talking about how we relate within the church, how much more should that be true as my wife and I, as our spouses, as we are seeking to follow the Lord together? So we're going to keep the original context in mind, and we're going to understand how this applies also to our relationships. And I think that love is the foundation that endures. Right? In relationships. It's the relational foundation that endures. In 1965, anybody ever been to Chicago? We talk about Chicago sometimes, right? I like Chicago. Lived there for 12 years. Chicago's cool. We lived and worked really close to the John Hancock Tower. It's since been renamed. I think it's 875 North Michigan Avenue. Whatever, that's so lame. It's always the John Hancock Tower to me. Well, in 1965, these guys got together and said, hey, let's build this tower that's going to become the John Hancock Tower, and they started construction on it. And 2 years into construction, they were 20 stories high, and they had a problem. They had a massive problem. The building was sinking. It kept settling. And they were like, the amount that it's settling is what we expect when we hit 99 floors, not 20 floors. Their foundation was not secure. So they're like, oh shoot, so they stopped. The original investor, he'd already invested $22 million into this project. That's a lot of money now. That was a ton of money back then. He had to pull out. So new investors came in. And they had to put 57 10-foot wide concrete pillars down. They had a special name for them. I don't know what the special, like big pillars down into the ground. Guess how deep they had to go? They had to go 197 feet. Think about that, 197 feet. Our houses right now, they're like 30 feet tall? 197 feet deep into the ground to hit bedrock. They needed a solid foundation. Otherwise, the building wasn't going to stand. It wasn't going to last. I think that some of us, as we're going through life, and as we get into our marriages and we get past year 1 and past year 5 and past year 7 and whatever the hard years are for you, ours were 1 through 8, and then, no, it wasn't 1 through 8. It was 1 and 2, right? Those were really, I was a jerk. Those were bad years, and 10 was a hard year, 15 was a hard year. We're on 18 now. But as we get into our marriages, as we see how our families are settling, I think some of us are panicking a little bit. Like, oh shoot, what I thought was a solid foundation isn't a solid foundation. What was working is no longer working, and I would argue that when we're in that situation, it's because we don't have the eternal foundation, the lasting foundation of love as the thing that undergirds every part of our relationships. Because when love is lacking, and we're not talking about just like worldly love, we're talking about biblical love. When that is lacking in our relationships, the foundation settles, and the building settles, and it threatens to tip, and it threatens to crumble. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at what does the Bible say about love, and how does it relate to our relationships? 1 Corinthians Chapter 13, verse 1. If you're using a Bible from the chairs, it's page 959. Verse 1 says, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all that I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. My words, thoughts, and actions are worthless without love. Do you see that? My words, thoughts, and actions are worthless without love. Let's unpack this verse 1. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Let's think about that. Let's see what Paul is saying here. Remember this in context of spiritual gifts in the church and how to edify the church. And he's saying, hey, look, if I've got the most clear speaking, most edifying words known to anybody, the most edifying words that we can even imagine. If I can communicate in any language on earth, if I can communicate clearly like we're looking at each other, Andrew, if I can communicate like this with angels, that's good communication. Are you ever in your marriage and you're just like, man, I just need to communicate better? Maybe a better scenario, and maybe a more common scenario. Man, my spouse needs to communicate better. Do you ever feel like that? But look what this says. Even if we're perfect communicators, even if we're the best communicators ever, without love, what does it say we are? What's the words it uses? Somebody tell me. What's it say? What is it? Somebody read it. Verse 1. What's it say?
Clanging cymbal.
Sounding brass, clanging cymbal, resounding gong. Loud, clanky. You ever try and talk to someone and it's just noisy and you can't hear them? Nothing gets communicated. When we were at the father-daughter camping trip a couple weeks ago, I had no idea. I've got 5 daughters and I still wasn't prepared for the clamor of 10 or 12 girls who were like 12 years old sitting in a circle all talking at once. Every single one of them had something to say, and their volume was high. And we were 20 feet away as dads were, and I was just like, I can't make sense of any of it. It was like a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. It was just, I don't know if they were communicating, but man, we couldn't understand anything. Even if, this is saying, even if you have the tongues of men and of angels, without love, that's what you are. Resounding gong, clanging cymbal, nothing is getting communicated. That's humbling, isn't it? Here's a suggestion. If you're in a conversation and you realize that you don't have love, shut up. Did you ever think of that? Your words aren't worth speaking. Without love, let's look at verse 2. Maybe I'm really loving in my communication, but am I loving in my knowledge? If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to move mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. Do you ever sit in a conversation with your spouse and you're just like, man, I wish I understood this thing more? As we were praying this morning, we've been praying, right? Starting today, we're praying for individual people at Hope. We're just going through the list of people at Hope, and we're saying, all right, you pray for this people, you pray for this people, you pray for these people, you pray for these people. Man, we don't know what's going on in everybody's lives, but we can pray for each other, and we're doing that. And one of the things that kept getting prayed for was that people would have discernment, that people would have wisdom, that people would understand the circumstances. Whenever I'm in a counseling situation, one of the things we pray for the most is that we will understand with clarity what's happening. What if we do understand? What if we can see through the relational fog? What if we can see through the emotions of that argument or that fight with our spouse? What if we can see through the deception of parenting? Sometimes we don't know what's going on. We're trying to figure it out. And all of a sudden there's a little sinner there who every once in a while, not every time, but every once in a while lies. And we just can't figure out what's true and what's not. What if we could? What if we could see perfectly? Paul says here, even if you can see perfectly, even if you have all knowledge, even if you have all understanding, even if you have understanding for the future and understand all the mysteries, without love, you're nothing. You've got nothing. So far, what do we have? We have, even if I have perfect knowledge and I can communicate it perfectly, if I don't have love, what should I do? Shut up! I have nothing. It's worthless without love. Wouldn't it be great to have perfect knowledge? I mean, those guys building the John Hancock Tower, they would have loved to have that perfect knowledge ahead of time. Think how much money they would not have wasted building that bad foundation for that awesome building. Perfect knowledge would be incredible. Without love, it's worthless. Let's move on to verse 3. If I give away all that I have and deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Loved ones, our actions are worthless without love. Here's what I think about when I think about this. I think about Psalm 127, verses 1 and 2. Unless the Lord builds a house, its laborers labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches the city, the watchmen watch in vain. We need to build our house. We need to build our lives God's way, don't we? And if we're doing this without love in our relationships, that's a lot of effort that leads to worthless things. It's a lot of effort that doesn't pay off. There's zero return on investment if we don't have love as our foundation. I think back over my week. I can think of at least one or two conversations just this week that I'm like, man, I wish I would have shut up at that point. Because that's the point that love left the conversation. How would our relationships change? Our first point. My words, thoughts, and actions are worthless without love. Love is the foundation. Right? It's the foundation. But you know what? That's not all. Let's jump to verse 8. Love is an eternal investment. Listen, not only does love bring value, it holds its value. So what are you talking about? Let's look and see what verse 8 says, right? Everybody get your eyes on verse 8. This is page 960. Verse 8 says, love never ends. Wait, when does it end? Never. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. Wait a minute. You're telling me all that education, all that striving, kids, still do your homework. It's worth it. But guys, it's going to pass away. What doesn't pass away? Love. Love does not pass away. It never ends. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. What does that mean? What does that mean when the perfect comes? It's when Christ returns and makes all things whole. When the new heaven and the new earth are here and we're no longer bound by sin or affected by it. We're now living with God in heaven, on the new heaven and the new earth, and the perfect comes. All of these imperfect things are going to pass away. You say, man, how does that work? Well, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. This is verse 11. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. When is Paul suggesting here that we're children? Look at that. Think about it. You help me with this. Help me understand this text. Look at it. What does it say? In this context, who is he calling a child? Everyone. When do we become grown up in this context? When we get to heaven. right? Because we have the partial, we have the unfamiliar, we have the things that we don't understand yet, and then when we get to heaven, it all becomes clear. There is an element of no matter how wise we get on earth, no matter how skillful we are at communicating, no matter how good we are at relating to our spouse, there's an element of it's still childish in God's eyes. Does that mean we shouldn't try? Absolutely not. We need to grow in it. But understand, loved ones, we need grace for each other, right? We're not going to hit it all out of the park right away. Perfection is going to come when Christ comes. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Listen to verse 12. For now we see in a mirror dimly. This is what he's talking about. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. Love is an eternal investment. It's the one thing that holds value. Knowledge passes away, prophecy passes away, tongues pass away. Everything on earth, everything in our earthly experience of our relationship passes away. As I think about my relationship with my wife, she's amazing, right? Have you gotten to know my wife yet? She was playing piano today. She's incredible. Sometimes we have disagreements. Most of the time they're my fault. True story, right? Most of the time. When I think about our disagreements, tell me if you relate to this. So many times when I want to have the last word, right, that's beyond the point of love, isn't it? When I want to have the last word with my wife, it comes out of a desire to be known. I want her to know. It's not always that I want her to understand and agree with me. So much of the time, well, in my best moments, I just want to be known. I want her to know me. I want her to understand me so we can dialogue and interact. And hey, great news. We are already fully known. You say, how do you shut up in the middle of an argument when things need to be said in respect? We're already known. The end of verse 12. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully. We don't know everything yet, but guess what? Christ already knows us completely. He already knows the points I'm trying to make to my wife, the points she's trying to make to me. Couples, whenever we're having those disagreements, and we just keep talking and keep getting it out there so that our spouse can just understand, this takes some pressure off, doesn't it? Because now all of a sudden, I don't have to make myself known. I do have to love. Okay, let's take a vote. Wives, do you want to be known? Yes or no? Raise your hand if you want to be known. All right, come on now. Men, do you want your wives to know you? Do you want to be known? Yes or no? All right, good. I didn't know how that one was going to go. We do want to be known. It's good to be known. It's important. Man, don't hear me say that like we don't want to communicate. We need to communicate. We need to tell. We need to express ourselves. My wife needs to speak up. In our relationship, I've got all the words. I mean, like all of them. She needs to speak up. She needs to tell me what she's feeling. But guess what? She doesn't need to do it out of a sense of insecurity, thinking that no one knows her. She's already fully known by the Lord. He understands. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. Some of us are going through some really hard times right now, right? Some of us have just some brutal aspects of our relationship. Guess what? God already knows. You don't have to go around gossiping about your spouse. You don't have to go venting to your mother about your spouse. You certainly don't need to go dragging your kids into your mess that you have with your spouse. God already knows you, and He sees you, and He cares for you, and He loves you. He has a way for you to work through these issues. But guess what? If you try and fix it with straw and stubble and things that don't last, the fix isn't going to hold. You're going to put a Band-Aid on a broken bone. We need something that's foundational. We need something that's going to last in our relationships. The problems that we're having, the problems they were having with the John Hancock Tower, they needed a better solution. Loved ones, we need a better solution in our relationships. We need a solution that is undergirded with love. So much of our efforts come out in us striving and straining, don't they? Let's go back to the middle part of this verse. Page 960, 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to start in verse 4. So far what we've seen is we've seen that our words, thoughts, and actions are worthless without love, right? Love is the foundation. It's the foundation of anything eternal. And then we see that love is an eternal investment that holds value. And love is what makes things last. But let's look at how that looks. Does anybody need help knowing what love looks like? Right? 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We're going to break this down just a little bit to understand. Here's one thing I want us to understand. One thing, love is not a doormat. Love is not like, it's not a bad excuse for an abusive spouse. Okay? It doesn't endure in that way. That's not what it's talking about. So let's start there. I'm going to say it again because this is important. Love is not an excuse for an abusive spouse. It's not an excuse for an abusive, dangerous relationship. It's not okay. It doesn't endure in that way. But here's what love is. You notice the focus of love? Look at these verses. It's kind. It doesn't envy or boast. The focus is outside of myself. My posture of love is not looking at me like, okay, what can I get for Andrew? How do I get this cheeseburger? Or how do I get this experience? Or how do I get this thing over here? Or how do I get my wife to just do what I want her to do? Or how do I get the vacation to go the way I want it to go? Or how do I get the kids to act the way I want them to act? How do I get things to work for me, to serve me, because I'm the king of the world? That's the opposite of the posture of love. The posture of love is others focused. The posture of love focuses on others because it rests in the knowledge that Christ is in control. And guess what? We're already fully known. With love, I don't have anything to prove to my spouse. I just love her. With love, she doesn't have anything to prove to me. She loves me. We don't have to strive and fight and bicker. Are we going to have conflict? Yeah. But conflict worked out in love is very different than conflict that is worked out with self-interest. Look at these words again that describe what love is and what love is not. It is patient. I don't know about you. When I'm focused on myself, I am not patient. On the way here today, some car from North Carolina, I hope it wasn't one of y'all, changed lanes right before the roundabout. And I started talking to that car from them. Come on, North Carolina, where are you going? That was really fun. Just pulling in front of me. I'm just kind of grumbling under with my breath. And one of my, I don't even know which daughter, one of my daughters is like, who are you talking to, Dad? I was like, the car in front of me. I was focused on myself and where I wanted to be. I wasn't patient. Right? I really hope that wasn't one of you guys. If it was, I'm sorry. I repent. It wasn't good. It's kind. How often when we focus on ourselves, do we, instead of like using mending words, instead of using amending, helpful healing posture, how often do we just start thrusting and start slashing at our spouses and our loved ones? So God gave me Tanya as a life partner. Why? Why would I thrust at her with my words? Why would I strike at her in my selfishness? Why? Why would I not want to be kind? I mean, from a selfish standpoint, it's better for me if I'm kind to her because that makes her better. But the posture of love, I don't even have to consider myself because I care for her. I'm kind to her. It doesn't envy or boast. It's not arrogance. How many of our conflicts are just because we're proud? Do you ever have that? It's easier to see in our kids, right? All of us have, a lot of us have children who are different than the other children. Some of them are really humble and compliant. Some of them are really strong-willed and not humble. But what if we like slow down and look at our own hearts and recognize that, man, so many of my problems aren't because they're proud. It's because I'm proud. And in my pride, I refuse to yield. I refuse to shut up when I need to shut up in my conversations with that kid. I think that's a big problem with this with our spouses. And sometimes when we're hurt, when we're wounded, we gotta talk about this just a little bit. Man, being wounded by a spouse, it just cuts deep, doesn't it? I mean, they know us better than anybody. We're vulnerable with them in a way that we're not vulnerable with anybody else. And when that sense of betrayal hits, when that pain comes, it is so difficult to, like verse 7 says, bear all things. It's difficult. It's hard. But that's the example, isn't it? Isn't that the example Christ gave to us? Remember, as he was going to the cross, it said, but for the joy set before him, he endured its shame. He took on sin. He didn't just take on sin, he took on your sin. He took on my sin. He endured the shame and the ridicule and the humiliation on our behalf. When we're wounded, it's hard, it's personal. But what's the posture of love? It's humility. It's not like I'm going to strike out and attack you. It's I'm going to be humble, I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to be caring even though I'm wounded. Can we just take a sidebar real quick and talk really practically? So if I'm I'm just going to use myself as an example, okay? Because I don't know where you're at, and I don't want to like accidentally say something that reveals something for somebody. I'm going to use myself as an example. This is a hypothetical thing that is not true. Everybody say it's not true. It's not true. My wife does not beat me, and I do not beat my wife. Okay? It's not true that we do it. We don't do it. We don't do it. Okay? But I know that that's a thing, right? Physical abuse in a relationship is a real thing. It's not okay. And if that were happening, love does not mean, like if I were striking my wife, that does not mean that she endures all things quietly and kindly towards me. If, and again, this is not happening, everybody say it's not happening. I gotta be real clear. This is not happening. If I were doing that to my children, and it's now unsafe for my kids, enduring all things does not mean that she sits quietly by and lets it happen. Part of love is protecting our kids from an abusive spouse. Part of love is speaking up in a safe context, be it at church, be it with the local authorities, getting the help we need for protection, not because we want to domineer that person who's the abuser, even though sometimes in some senses that needs to happen. Right? We need that outside help. God gives us the local authorities, and he gives us the government to carry a sword to execute justice and to force things sometimes. That's a grace from the Lord. But the goal is, how do we find reconciliation that's safe? So again, it's not happening, but if I were an abusive husband, especially a physically abusive husband, Tanya would need to say something. She would need to speak up. She would need to get help. And you guys, as she talks to you, you guys would need to step in. Physically step in. Stop it from happening. Get the authorities involved, right? There has to be, at minimum, there has to be some type of a safe separation. Right? Church, we have to protect the vulnerable. love, enduring love, and it has nothing to do with enduring that type of abuse. It doesn't make her selfish for speaking out. To not speak out would be selfish. Because once we speak out, once we get that help, now we can start to work through the problem. Working through the problem is really difficult. It's really hard things need to be talked about. Hard things need to be done. Hard decisions need to be made. Hard actions need to happen. But we have to work through those problems. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Let's walk together in that, right? Let's commit to that. Let's walk with each other as we're going through difficult things. Here's a way that I think about it when I think of how love is others focused, right? What are the actions I need to take? I need to be humble. I need to be humble. We need to be quiet more often than not, right? We need to be Christ-like. Christ demonstrates his own love for us. And while we were still sinners, he died for us, right? We need to be Christ-like. We need to be willing to be self-sacrificing in the appropriate ways. So here's our concluding question. As we look back at our week, as we look back at our month, as we look back at our decade, as we think about for those of us who are married, as we look at our marriages, for those of us who are not married, as we think about our relationships with other people, maybe we're looking forward to marriage, maybe we're not. Wherever God has us, as we look at our most intimate relationships, how would they be different if I loved the way 1 Corinthians 13 is telling me to love? How would they be different if my words, if the foundation of my words was love? How would it be different if the foundation of my knowledge and my understanding was love? How would it be different if the foundation of my actions was love? How would my relationships be different if when I tried to work through problems, the heart of it was love? How would my relationships be different? As the worship team comes up, let's just reflect on that for a moment. And will you commit to something with me? Will you commit to something with me? As we sing this last song, if God is bringing specific instances of your life where you're like, that part of that relationship had no love, and that was my fault. Will you commit to going and repairing that, going and saying to that person, hey person, I was unloving in this, will you please forgive me? My words might have been correct. My actions might have been correct. But my heart was not there. My heart was not coming from a loving place. Will you commit to repairing that and confessing that to that person? Let's stand and chosen song.